My name is Patrick Paul Walsh. I'm a full professor of development studies, international development studies, University College Dublin, and also vice president of education in the UN SDSN and director of the SDG Academy. So it's a joy to host the side event today at the UN Partnership Forum. So this is an official side event, and during COVID, side events online became very popular, and they're continuing into this year all the way up to the SDG Summit. But this is an official meeting of the UN Partnership Forum, so welcome. So just to introduce the session a little bit, so we're saying it's partnerships in the SDG Education and Training. So the logic of how we're going to run is that Tanis from the UN Library, the Chief of the UN Library, is going to just talk about, is SDG knowledge there? Is it open? Can we get it easy? Is it easy to repurpose? And then we move on to the education sector, which Omar from the UN Academic Impact. And then we have two people from the corporate side who are going to talk about how you bring in SDG knowledge into the operations of the corporate side. And then finally, we'll have Brighton, who is from UN SDSN Youth, and he will just talk about a youth perspective. So just two things. One is we all basically are speaking in our own personal capacity. So we don't, obviously we're part of organizations, but we do not represent them today. So we're all speaking in our own personal capacities. And the second thing is myself and Christine have to run at 9:20 to get a pass to go into another speaking function inside the UN. But Brighton, on behalf of SDSN, will take over the chair, and Samantha's there as well to run the Q&A. So you can keep the conversation going to 9:30 or 9:40 or however long that you think you want to do it. But without further ado, then I'm going to first hand the floor and give the first 8 minutes to Tanis. Tanis Giannakopoulos. I don't know whether I've pronounced that right, but he's the chief of the UN Library, and really has done one of the, I'll just point out one thing, which is the UN Digital Library resource. It's really, really wonderful that if you want to go in as a researcher or anyone and you want to get a document and see how it's linked to UN meetings or outcome documents or UN agencies, it has a bit of AI magic going on there, and you'll actually see how that search engine works. And it's obviously one of the big innovations of Tanis, but he has other things on his mind going forward. So I give the floor to you, Tanis. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for the invitation to the United Nations The Commercial Library. I'm delighted to be here and talk briefly about a global scientific knowledge commons for the SDGs, which is a concept that the UN Library has been putting forward. So during the pandemic, the component of openness in the scientific process achieved criticality, I think. UNESCO, the World Health Organization, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, and the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights launched a joint appeal for open science. Research and funding institutions, publishers, libraries switched COVID-19 related research output to open access, in some cases overnight, ensuring researchers and citizens could easily obtain scientific information. Sharing of scientific data during the COVID-19 crisis has indeed been unprecedented. Increased funding for applied research took the lead in the biomedical science, and the global community concentrated on the medical aspects of defeating the pandemic. On the other hand, the societal impact of the pandemic and the replication of existing social, cultural, and economic inequalities could have a lesser impact on the world if only these inequalities were excluded from the pure statistical modeling employed to tackle the public health crisis and the vaccine distribution. Intersectional approaches criticized open science and some of its practices, while discussion of equitable access to scientific information resurfaced, as did the potential of a new colonization of knowledge. The scientific superpowers of the high-income country strengthened their position of the global scientific production. It is almost impossible for a scientist in the low or even middle-income countries to afford to pay an exuberant amount in order to publish in certain reputable journals. And yet, the research she or he undertakes is of no lesser importance. Regarding only one of the SDGs, climate action, which is about a crisis that poses an existential challenge for humanity, we observe that publicly funded climate research literature, vital for people to understand the extent of the problem and the available solution, still lies behind online paywalls. Promising campaigns to release it have just recently been initiated. And yet, we also observe that misinformation and disinformation about research on diverse scientific topics is available freely online. Scientists, academia, research funding agencies, librarians, publishers, and young researchers with their grassroots initiatives have a crucial role to play in developing a digital global scientific knowledge commons for the SDGs, a platform of human knowledge for the benefit of humanity. As an idea, this knowledge commons brings all the benefits of the natural commons to the digital universe and sees science as a public good. Scientific knowledge interlinked with the SDGs is available to all for their benefit, for them to use when they confront material and intangible challenges, when devising or choosing which action to take to accelerate the SDGs implementation. Open science may be the keystone here to assert everyone's human right to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. However, we need a systemic change in the scientific knowledge production chain. So a global scientific knowledge commons and infrastructure in service of the Sustainable Development Goals can support and promote the global normalization of open scientific outputs and processes, and the evaluation of research assessments and the academic rewards culture that exists today. An infrastructure ensuring that context-specific science is supported and recognized across groups and regions, noting that scientists in many developing regions and from indigenous and minority groups face barriers to both publishing and accessing research. Interdisciplinarity, the diverse nature of research and the prism of intersectionality, along with measures to support research for and by marginalized and regional communities, can lead to a more holistic and inclusive approach for the research the planet needs in our rapidly digitalized and data-driven future. A commons that will be intentional in securing a system-wide shift to bibliodiversity, inclusiveness, multilingualism, and diversity in the research agendas, addressing gender asymmetries in research, adept in communicating science, and nurturing partnerships in pursuing a science that is of social relevance for all. In action, in our first Open Science Conference, which was organized by the Dag Hammarskjöld Library and the Department of Economic and Social Affairs Division of Sustainable Development Goals, a roadmap for such a commons was drawn through the consensus of 19 eminent personalities in academia and scholarly communications. The roadmap presented key principles for the creation of a global scientific knowledge commons and identified its elements. In the second Open Science Conference, we concentrated on the lessons learned on open science from the pandemic, which can be employed in climate actions, and concluded that open exchange of scientific data and information revealed to have a fundamental role in the open research scientific process for any commons. I would like today to invite you to join us on 8 to 10 February 2023 at the third United Nations Open Science Conference, which is organized by the Dag Hammarskjöld Library and the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, Division of Sustainable Development Goals, and UNESCO, and take part in the discussion we will initiate about creating and maintaining a global scientific knowledge commons for the SDGs. As the momentum of open science is unwavering, powered by new groundbreaking national policies, international instruments, and targeted cooperation within and among nations, the global scientific knowledge commons for the SDGs lends itself easily to the open science suite of practices. And in closing, I think the most interesting problem to focus on now is the last mile problem. So how are we to bring the broader community of researchers on board? What are the ways to incentivize the open sharing of science and accelerating progress towards achieving the SDGs? These are some of the questions we will address in the conference. And I want to thank you very much for your attention. And once again, thank you, Paul, for the invitation.
So that's wonderful, Tana. So really buying into this idea of the scientific commons, SDG commons, and I look forward to populating that. And I'm very much looking forward to the third Open Science Conference in the 5th to the 8th, the 5th the 8th of February to the 10th of February in next week, basically. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Omar Hernandez. He's the Public Information Officer at UN Academic Impact, and they've been running wonderful webinars and supports for universities all across the world to get SDG orientated. And he himself was a professor of a great career as a professor of international public law, international human rights, and international journalism. So he's well able to communicate to the academic world. So I hand the floor to you, Omar.
Thank you very much indeed for the invitation to this event. And indeed, it's a great opportunity to meet with colleagues, but also to talk about the mandate that the UN Academic Impact has. For those of you who might not be familiar, the UN Academic Impact is an initiative that engages with institutions of higher education around the world to foster and enhance the relationship with the United Nations and to promote the goals and ideals, but also the fundamental values that the organization has been advocating for since its foundation in 1945. We deeply believe in this idea that universities, academia, the scientific research is actually a very valuable stakeholder to promote such goals, but also to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Actually, if we recall the agenda itself, right prior to listing all the SDGs and the different targets, it actually mentions academia as this valuable stakeholder that is supposed to work together in the implementation of the agenda itself, with governments and parliaments. So we deeply believe, as also because one of the core principles that predates the SDGs in UNAI is precisely the promotion of sustainability through higher education. I have seen in this position on a daily basis the reports coming from all around the world. We have over 1,600 member institutions in more than 152 countries. And we definitely have seen that through their teaching, research, and community engagement initiatives, universities and colleges are deeply advocating for the SDGs in practice, not only to promote awareness and advocacy among students and their families and the places in which these students live, but also to align academic courses to the SDGs, to embed SDGs in the curricula of the different academic programs, and to even align scientific projects and research projects with the different SDGs in order to reduce, narrow, and ultimately eliminate this gap that we have seen between research and policy making and decision making. It is truly it is an actual accurate fact, as the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us, that there should be a more robust linkage, a more robust relationship between what happens in academia and what happens outside of campus. And this COVID-19 pandemic, but also even the invasion of the Russian Federation to Ukraine, and many other situations, including those affecting peace and conflict at the international, global, and regional level, is certainly a fact that the more we use the research, the more informed decisions we will have, and the more robust and enhanced policies we will have. And vice versa, the less research that we have, so we will not have the data, we will not have the information, and we will not have the facts that those in power will need to make the decisions that we all need. Ultimately, the world itself will benefit from the outcomes and results of the research that is being conducted and has been conducted inside of the universities. Pretty much everything that the UN does in all different fields, not only those affecting particularly the sustainable area as an academic core, but also related to human rights, related to the resolution of poverty, and so on. Pretty much the whole agenda and all its 17 goals. Pretty much everything has been developed and has been taught and has been researched in institutions of higher education. Now, of course, we have a problem here because we are advocating from the UN Academic Impact to have a more to stress global academic cooperation, particularly global South and global North cooperation. And while the United Nations itself, as per the UN Charter in Article 1, really fosters that cooperation from at the intergovernmental level, from the UNI side, we are trying to do so at the academic level. But there's still some resistance, yet we have seen the will in many universities to share their thoughts, to share their ideas, to share their practices, to share the results of that research, but we really need to have the platforms to make that available. We really need to produce and have tools that will allow and enable universities to share those wonderful products of their research. And we have seen many papers and journals around the world that actually are, the authors are coming from different universities around the world. This is fantastic, but this is just the very first step. The idea is that the knowledge that is produced inside of universities is open not only to other universities, but to the world, and specifically to those who are in the position that they have a fundamental role to implement, design, assess, evaluate, and review policies that ultimately are affecting all of us. This is why for us, probably, and I always say this whenever I talk about the SDGs, for me, the most important one of the goals is precisely number 17. And let me make a pause here, because if we recall the purposes of the UN Charter, many people tend to forget that the very last purpose, which is more often than not the most neglected one, is that the UN is here to harmonize the actions of the international community to achieve all the other things. So if we apply the same rationale to the SDGs, can definitely assure that if we don't partner with other stakeholders, if we don't partner with civil society, if we don't partner with libraries, if we don't partner with the private sector, if we don't partner with churches, foundations, religious groups, and of course academia, we are definitely not going to achieve any of the other 16 goals. So for me, and from the UNAI side, partnering between universities and between universities and the entire rest of the world is critically important. It's actually crucial and vital to achieve the SDGs. And I welcome the organization of our colleagues from the Bahamas Library, the organization of this conference that is happening within the next few days. We really advocate for this, and from the UNAI side, we have developed, for example, an SDGs toolkit precisely to promote the exchange of ideas and best practices between the universities. We are also doing, as Paul mentioned, these multilingual SDGs workshops. We are also doing SDGs trainings that started just two weeks ago. And we have been doing all these things related to SDGs, and to our surprise, we have seen a very enthusiastic academic world that really wants to connect with the rest of the world. Is something that the silver lining of the COVID pandemic is people wants to connect more. People is fully aware how globalized the world is, and that definitely is an opportunity in this global crisis. In this global crisis, I would say it is a chance to really promote academic cooperation at the bottom, but also at the very high and top level. I thank you very much indeed for your invitation.
Thanks very much, Omar, and very much appreciate the points that to have a platform or mechanism to actually share our resources across countries for repurpose and translate to different languages is just vital, and we're going to be working on that, of course. And then secondly, that this has to be done in partnership with the great convening power of UNAI, I think is very much taken. So and we look forward to the Open Science Conference again next week. So again, without further ado, I'll move on to our next speaker. So Christine Stevens is a Vice President of Sustainability Engagement in JP Morgan Chase and Co. But she's speaking on her own behalf, and she's also currently doing a master's degree in Sustainability Studies in Harvard as well. So she knows the interconnection. So without further ado, I'll hand the floor over to Christine, and thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much, Professor. I'm so excited to be here. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to create a global knowledge commons. I'm very hopeful for that move forward. And I think there's a lot of momentum that's starting to build. When you look at corporations, it's a really different type of animal than when you're looking at any kind of academia or any kind of government entity. So, of course, in corporate culture, if you are not familiar, there is almost always, especially in the large corporations, a focus on employees with respect to satisfaction, engagement, and personal development and skill development. And that third piece really focuses on two angles. One is job skills, and the other is professional development or personal development opportunities. So learning and development in a corporation, that setting, you have, of course, your required job skills that you need to complete either for your job or the role that you have in the company. And in some cases, it's a little loud here, we're in New York, there's a lot of life here. So in some cases, you also have mandatory regulatory types of training that you need to take depending on the role that you have and what the corporation's line of business is. So you always have also in these large corporations, personal learning opportunities that you can choose yourself as an employee. So maybe I want to look at how to have a better work-life balance. So it's on that personal side. Maybe I want to learn more about something that will help me additionally in my role at the company that's not job required, but something that gives me a broader perspective on the business itself. And then you also have the informal peer-to-peer training and learning and knowledge sharing that occurs. So I sit with my colleague and chat about their position at the company and what they do and challenges they face. Or maybe we talk about things like work-life balance or things that are not really job related, but certainly foot to your personal satisfaction and your positive outlook as you come into your job. So there is a precedent already in place around learning and partnerships for learning. So lots of corporations do offer things like tuition reimbursement for employees to expand their knowledge and skill set through degree programs. And they also offer, in a lot of cases, free subscriptions to industry resources such as a Harvard Review or things of that nature, where you as an employee can take advantage of those opportunities and, again, broaden your knowledge base. Lots of corporations also bring in external experts on certain subjects to talk about what's happening in the industry, where is there innovation that's occurring, what are challenges, and it could be anything to do with what that business is interacting with. So there are lots of opportunities when you work at a company to take advantage of it. And there are also some challenges that are pretty standard. One is, and clearly, capacity. So I have a job. My first priority is my job when I'm at a corporation, right? And the company is certainly trying to be successful in whatever line of business that they're in. So employees are expected to have job one when they come into the office. And I use that term loosely these days. You might be coming in virtually, but when you start to work at your job, you're expected to put that first. And then employees a lot of times are encouraged to take advantage of these other opportunities that the company will offer. So the second big challenge is that you're competing not just for capacity and time for the employees, but also interest. So if I have my time spent on my role, and then I have extra time to apply to additional opportunities, my personal interest is going to help drive which of those opportunities I delve into. So you may not have an interest for by employees to look at the SDGs or think about climate change, those types of things. There is a momentum out there, of course, as climate change topics have really proliferated more and more through the landscape in the corporate world. Lots of companies are starting to, if they have not done it already, they're starting to create ESG reports and focus on how can I, as a company, be more sustainable? How can I help the employees who work here work in a more sustainable environment? How can I help them understand how they can personally live more sustainably? And that's where I think there's a great opportunity to inject information about the SDGs. And I'm personally never been a proponent of the word learning or the term training. I think it carries some negative connotations for some folks. But if you think about it as knowledge sharing and broadening your personal perspective, I think that makes a huge difference in the way that people have an open mind to having information come in front of them. I think it's great to be able to bridge that gap. It's an awareness gap, is how I consider it. People have different levels of knowledge about climate change and specifically the SDGs. There's a huge gap there with people understanding, first being aware that they're existing, and then understanding what they are and how they work and why they're important. So I think we have the door open to creating a global knowledge commons. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to be able to partner with the other big entities such as government and nonprofit organizations and, of course, academia to bring this to the fold and make it more of the absolute thing that's just the norm going forward. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I see personally is that being able to accelerate that momentum. It's starting, but it's certainly not going fast enough for it to become the norm in a way that next year we see everybody has this opportunity to plug in and everybody's aware of it. So I think that that's a great place to focus. And if we take purposeful action to place that as a focus and make sure that we're thinking globally and partnering proactively with other entities, I think there's a lot of opportunity for this to be successful. And thank you again, Professor, for inviting me. It's super.
Thank you, Christine. And wonderful point on the partnership. That's music to the ears. And then the other thing, which is quite right, is that, you know, we're trying to, in universities, we're trying to orientate stuff to, you know, education and research and policy papers to the SDGs, but actually the big job is through HR or policies and strategic planning. So we're a company like any other company, and we have to, but the good news is, as you say, is we already know to do this because we've been doing it for DEI. We've been doing it for, you know, people are upskilling and training and doing teaching and learning courses. So it's not, we have to reinvent the wheel, but we do have to orientate it towards the public good and towards the SDGs and the global commons. So that's kind of the difference. So that this is wonderful. Again, thank you very much. So Lorcan Hall, so he's a graduate of the MSc in Sustainable Development in partnership with the SDG Academy, but a long career in insurance, and he is now speaking on his own behalf, but he's with SCORN as head of business model development and corporate foresight. So I'll give the floor to you, Lorcan.
Thank you very much, Professor Walsh, and thanks very much to all the speakers so far. I've been writing furiously about what Thanos, Omar, and Kristen have said, and it's pairing some more thoughts in my head. So my name, as Professor Walsh said, my name is Lorcan Hall. I recently completed a Master's in Sustainable Development at University College Dublin in partnership with the UN SDSN. In my experience, Professor Walsh is probably a little too modest about this pioneering course. I think it's fantastic. It's fully online, digital, allowing students from across the world. And the peer component of the learning over the last year and a half has been fantastic, opening my eyes to all these challenges that me as a white Western European man don't fully appreciate. So that's been just eye-opening. So I'll speak briefly about three topics. Firstly, the motivation for beginning my SDG knowledge journey. Two, how does knowledge strengthen my understanding of how insurance contributes towards the SDGs? And finally, a proposal on how we might scale up the dissemination of SDG knowledge to experienced professionals like myself. So first of all, the motivation for beginning my SDG knowledge journey. I began working full-time in 1996, joining the insurance industry in 1998. Operations, tech, projects, strategy, innovation. And tech was a big part of it. But like many other industries, digital technologies has transformed the insurance landscape. And as we know, digital technologies have permeated our personal and professional lives over the last few years in particular. But technology is it's a means to an end, but not an end in itself. And I was struggling to articulate the value and power of insurance towards the societal challenges we're facing. So I decided to take some time out and study the Masters, really just to equip myself with a scientifically anchored understanding of these societal challenges that we all face, but also how we might drive that urgently required change. So next up, how does this knowledge strengthen my understanding of how insurance contributes to the SDGs? And the first thing is that there's a compelling symmetry between insurance and the 2030 agenda. The guiding principle at the heart of insurance that many pay for the few, meaning that many people pay insurance premiums so that when a few people experience unwanted events such as natural catastrophes or illnesses, there's a financial safety net there. And this principle is wonderfully echoed in the 2030 agenda's central promise to leave no one behind, suggesting there are insurance opportunities to power action across the SDGs. And to clarify, when I speak about insurance, there's two types really. There's social protection insurance programs, which is funded by government tax and spend policies, and there's voluntary solutions delivered by the private sector. And just to make it real and to help understand how I was processing all this, the SDG knowledge from an insurance perspective, we'll just share three examples. One, SDG 1, as we know, it's no poverty. So today, 700 million people live in extreme poverty, surviving on less than $2 a day. But there are close to 4 billion people at the world's population that are vulnerable to poverty if they're impacted by a shock like climate change, like a health issue, like fuel and food shortages, like price increases. Now, these people don't have sufficient financial safety nets. But insurance solutions can play a role to provide them with the resilience in the face of our increasingly complex world. SDG 3, good health and well-being. Of course, we want universal health coverage for everyone, but I think the COVID-19 pandemic has acutely illustrated how fragile and underfunded our health systems are. Like, public healthcare systems can benefit from complementary, robust private systems. Like, for example, if someone has the ability, somebody can afford to pay for insurance premiums, they should be encouraged to do so, because when they face an unexpected medical issue, they can tap into that private resource rather than go to the already strained public healthcare system. So we talk about insurance from the perspective of SDG 3. It's not publicly funded healthcare systems or privately funded healthcare systems, public and private. SDG 13, climate action, right? There are many ways that insurance solutions can pair adaptation and mitigation efforts. As we know, massive investments are required into renewable energy projects. These solutions cannot happen without insurance during the construction and ongoing maintenance of these programs. For the most part, private capital will not be mobilized towards these projects without private insurance solutions. So insurance is key to enabling the energy transition. So the master's that I studied has equipped me with a scientific framework to think about these societal challenges and consider where insurance solutions can best add value. I'm not claiming that insurance solutions can add value across all 17 SDGs. I think it should be focusing on a few areas where it can best add value. Just finally then, how might we scale up the dissemination of industry-specific SDG knowledge to experienced professionals? And this is something that Professor Walsh and I have been kicking around a lot over the last few months. So SDG 4, as we know, it's about inclusive and equitable access to quality education, but it's also about promoting lifelong learning. So there are great SDG education initiatives for primary, secondary, and tertiary students, and there's great stuff happening within university, as Omar has outlined. But what about the people already in the workforce? Old people like me. We can't wait for younger generations to grow into the positions of power and influence to drive change. We also need to equip older generations with actionable SDG knowledge today. So few people will have the option to study a master's full-time like I did. So what other options are available? I think the SDG Academy courses they're excellent. Fantastic resources offering dozens of online courses that describe the scale and the complexity of all these challenges really well. However, I think all these challenges can be overwhelming, paralyzing even. I think there's possibly a bit missing about some of the actions and solutions. So do those courses offer a path to action for experienced people like me? I believe they begin the journey definitely, but there's something else required to bring experienced people along that journey. What are the solutions? I think we all know what the problems are, what the challenges are. It's about getting stuff done now. And I think what we need to do is develop together between the public and private sector, touching on that open science philosophy, or guided by the open science philosophy that Thanos spoke about, to design SDG Academy material that's delivered for industry-specific audiences. Now, the desired outcomes would be a common language and frameworks for public and private stakeholders to come together to build a shared understanding of the societal challenges, but then subsequently helping us to deeply engage and team up to deliver insurance, risk, and resilience solutions across the SDGs. So that's my call to action. Just really clear. Now, it complements and supplements what Kristen spoke about there, but it's industry-specific SDG courses to mainstream the SDGs, make them more real to experienced professionals like myself, and help us to collectively better understand how to drive material change, real-world solutions. So again, conclusion, I've just shared my motivations for beginning the SDG knowledge journey, shared examples of how the insurance solutions can deliver value across the SDGs, which I had difficulty articulating before studying the master's. And then finally, one really clear, sharp call to action. Professor Walsh and the SDG Academy, let's team up across industry to develop industry-specific SDG Academy material. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorcan, and that's music to my ears. That's the challenge, that going into the professional training area to And it's the challenge inside universities too. We've got to get more discipline and sector specific and really get into the solutions and the partnerships. And I think that's music to my ear. So very nice presentation again. So I'm moving on to, I'm actually going to hand the next speaker the chair, and he's going to host the Q&A as well. I'm going to be with you as long as I can, but I need to go and collect some passes. But I'm going to hand you over to Brighton Kaoma, who's the Global Director of SDSN Youth. And again, he's got an MPA in Environmental Science from Columbia University, but he's a wealth of experience representing youth and the youth voice right across East Africa and beyond. So I'll hand the chair and I'll let you give your talk as well, Brighton.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. Very excited to listen to the incredible presentation so far, and also to just see how interconnected some of the approaches, ideas are. I think before we go into the Q&A, I'm very keen to also bring to your attention the fact that each generation, like the present generation, has a right to pass on wisdom and knowledge to the next generation. The concept of intergenerational equity requires that each generation has a right to inherit the same diversity in natural, cultural, health, and economic resources enjoyed by previous generations, but also most importantly, to equitably access and use the benefits of these resources. It's therefore extremely fundamental to recognize that young people from different parts of the world are seeking the knowledge and the skills which can allow them to compete favorably in the fourth industrial revolution. Within SDSN Youth, we are responding to a number of different calls with the Transforming Education Summit, which took place last year in September, having set a foundation which is embedded in the Youth Declaration for Transforming Education, calling upon all leaders, both in government and the private sector, to think about creating resources and the political commitment needed to democratize access to learning, access to education, and access to resources. We see in our work within the SDSN Youth that young people from different parts of the world experience very unique, different challenges and opportunities. We've seen gaps in young people from the Global South to access specific education resources and tools. So how do we collectively think about creating opportunities for learning and training, especially among those young constituencies that are left behind? So beginning with the ones left behind first is one of the principles that the Youth Declaration on Transforming Education sets at the pedestal. But also the idea of having to pay a debt back is the basis of the concept of indirect or direct reciprocity, which is also part of the Transforming Education Youth Declaration. Over the last 5 years, SDSN Youth has built what we call the SDG Students Program, which works with students across universities to give them pathways to knowledge and understanding on the SDG goals, but also equip them with the tools to take action in their respective universities and communities. And now we are working across over 150 universities where we have SDG student hubs, really putting the power in the young people to engage in dialogue and pass on resources, tools, and skills to their members in these universities. And the SDG Academy has been a good resource from which we tap open access education resources around the SDG goals. But also, most importantly, we are seeing that with the COVID-19 pandemic, so many young people, especially those that are coming from under-resourced communities, were left behind and cut off from accessing their fundamental right to learning and education, with others not having digital tools to access learning opportunities or to access tools like their counterparts, especially in the West. So I think it's quite fundamental to also think about those young people that don't have the resources, the tools, and the opportunities to access, traditional learning opportunities like many other young people do. It's for this reason that SDSN Youth, in partnership with other youth-led organizations globally, is beginning to think ahead of the Summit for the Future, which was recommended by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, taking place in 2024, to promote multilateralism and think about how do we shape the future of the next generations. And SDSN Youth in the next few months will conduct robust global consultations, engaging every young person's voice, irrespective of where they are from, into forming one single position on what should be the future of education for young people. How do we build onto the Transforming Education Youth Declaration? And how do we ensure that there is political commitment from UN member states to educate young women and girls, to educate young people of color, to educate young people that don't have access to opportunities and resources like many others. I hope to collaborate and partner with most of you as we embark on giving young people the tools, the skills, and the opportunities they need for them to learn. I will stop here and thank you for your attention.